Hi there. Welcome once again. I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to Reading Aristotle's Politics. We're continuing our reading of Book 8, Book 7, Book 7, which deals with the best regime. Um, so, and the last time we met, we did Chapter 8, which dealt with, the question of what were the essential parts of the city. In other words, what are the kind of key things that you cannot go, and he gives 6 points, 6 things that are essential, that things that the city must do if it's going to be self-sufficient in that sense. And now we're turning to the continuation of these things, right? He's going to expand on these questions. Chapter 9. Okay, starting with chapter 9. So let's go look at this, right? This is his account of establishing the big regime, the best regime we would pray for. That thinking all, in other words, but removing all chance or accident. This is going to be the one that would be best, right? Again, as I said in the beginning of my examination of chapter 8, 7, I mean 7, book 7, there's something, this section of Aristotle's Politics where he presents his best, we should always maybe see he's testing us. We should see if is he really making this argument, particularly when he says something here that would contradict or go run against something he's argued, let's say in book 1, book 2, book 3. Okay. Uh, some people say, maybe what about book 4 and 5 and 6? Well, maybe too, but depends on, this. The question is how the book should read. Should 4, 5, and 6 be read kind of parallel to 7 and 8? Or should 7 and 8 come after 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6? We know that the beginning of book 7 uh, 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 is exactly the end of book 3, right? So therefore, this led to not medieval, early modern German scholars to argue, like Schuschmiel and Jager, to argue. These Germanic philologists argue that we should reorder the books, right? This is why Schuschmiel's edition has what we consider book 7 really right after book 3. And so, and this is what leads us this is what leads someone like Peter Simpson in his translation. Peter Simpson is the only translation I know in English that uses the alternative ordering. So this discussion of what we call book 7, he would call book 4, right? Um, uh, 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 but I'm going to suggest we should stick with the traditional ordering, because this is what the ordering was done by most of the early scholars, particularly the first Latin translation by Morbic in was it 13th century? No, 13, yeah, the beginning of the Morbic period. Again, the 13th century, Morbic's translation of the 1200s of translation, but translation to Latin, the first translation of Latin we know of the politics, right? So we have a very interesting thing here about this sense. Um, so we're going to be looking now in chapter 9, right? We're going to be looking at 9 about this question of what is essential to the city, the parts, right, the things. These things having been discussed, it remains to investigate whether all are to share in all of these things, or whether it's possible for the same persons should be farmers, artisans, and those who deliberate and adjudicate, or different persons are to be presupposed for each of the functions mentioned, or some of these are necessary, special, and others in common. So this leads to the question of the division of labor in the city, right? This leads us to the question of what's these essential parts. They're essential. The question is, okay, should all the citizens share in them equally, or should there's going to be a division of labor? So, but should all citizens share in these things equally? Should all share in the farming, the artisans, and deliberative and judicative elements, right? Which is that last sixth element, right? Or should different persons be supposed for each of these functions, right? And some of these are necessary, special, and others common, right? So the special ones are going to be special, and those will be common. So therefore, we look at this. It is not the same in every regime. So every regime will, in other words, every regime will differ on this question of in other words, who should be what, and should they all be common or should they not be common? Should they have who should exercise particularly these functions in other words, who should be the ones who are soldiers, who should be who should. Now he says he doesn't mention soldiers, those who should have arms, right? That's another question, right? But also those who should deliberate and adjudicate. Should all people adjudicate, or should these be separate classes? Plato has us in the Republic to argue these are separate classes. Classes that these are that class, the soldiers are the silver, and the highest classes, the philosophers, or those who should rule or should be deliberate and adjudicate are those who are those who possess logos, right? Those who possess reason, those who have good souls who are dominated by reason, versus those thumos are the soldiers. They should be guarded by those who are reason, and then those who are or everyone who's erotic or moved by desires. These are the bronze, right? Those are the famous things. And he's saying here that this is not every regime is going to be ordered the same here. This is that point that regimes are going to differ in regarding to who's and what who can be part of the deliberative and adjudicative, right? For as we said, it is possible for all to participate in everything, or for not to participate in everything, but some in some things. Okay, so therefore, in other words, these things too make regimes different. In democracies, all partake in everything, while in oligarchies, it's the opposite. Only few, the richest, do it. Right? Only the richest do it. Okay, so therefore, in democracies, all participate in everything. The most radical, this is the democracy would have everyone participates in the question of what's here, deliberating and adjudication. Oligarchy is only the wealthiest and the most wealthiest of the people adjudicate and deliberate. Right. So this is the point here. Since we happen to be investigating concerning the best regime, and this is the one in accordance to which a city would be happy above all. And since it was said earlier, okay, this is 42, at 7:1, the beginning of this, right? Uh, um, okay, I'm sorry. We said earlier that happiness cannot be present apart from virtue. It is evident from these things that in the city that is most Cologne, be finely or beautifully, nobly governed, um, one possessing one possessing men who are just unqualifiedly and not relative to a presupposition. The citizen should not live as workers or a merchant way of life, for this sort of life is ignoble and contrary to virtue. So, so who should be a citizen? Well, a citizen should be one who is what? Who is just unqualifiedly and not relative to a presupposition. In other words, a presupposition is a claim. In other words, a claim about justice, right? They must be the ones who are just simple. In other words, who are really just, who are really everyone, all groups make claims, presuppositions to justice. The best regime should be the ones who are just. But now his argument here is that only the citizens should not live a worker's life or a mechanical merchant's way of life, because this is ignoble and contrary to virtue. There's something about the worker and the merchant is not, therefore, not be an artisan. Artisans cannot be citizens. The citizen way of life must be free, must be labor. In other words, nor indeed should it be those who are going to be citizens in such a regime be farmers, for there is a need for leisure, both with the view of the creation of virtue and with a view of political activities. So, well, so the citizen is not going to be even a farmer, okay? Not going to be a farmer, not going to be a farmer. It can't be farmers. And that's why earlier he talked about, well, we're going to have serfs, right? Who are going to be slaves or serfs who are going to be working the farms. That the citizen will own the farm, but the people who are doing the farming are going to be servants or serfs or slaves in that sense. Um, but merchants and workers can't be citizens either. So this is um, Therefore, because why? Virtue, living the life of virtue and the life of and the being able to do political activities requires leisure, a skule in that sense, right? This is leisure, skule. Um, but since both the military elements and the elements that deliberate concerning the advantageous things and judges concerning the things and here in the city are essentially parts of it above all, must too be regarded as different, or at least be assigned to the same person. In other words, those who deliver. In other words, the military element and those that deliberate an advantage. Should they be the same person or not? This too is evident in a manner it should be the same person, and in a manner two different persons. Right. Insofar as each of these tasks belong to a different prime of life, one requiring prudence, the other power. It should be to different persons. It should be to different persons, but insofar it is impossible that those who are capable of using compulsion and preventing its being used against them will always put up with uh, being used against them, will always put up with being ruled. Again, in other words, those who are capable of compulsion and preventing it being used against them will always put up with being ruled. In other words, those who have the capacity to what? Force, and those who have the capacity to not have force put upon them would not put up with being ruled. To this extent, they should be the same person. So therefore, those who are what? Those who are deliberating, exercising deliberation and adjudication should also have force behind them, because otherwise, if the other groups are the force, they will not tolerate being ruled. Right? That's the whole point. In other words, those who have the ability to force, those who have the arms, those who have those who have the capacity to force, are not going to tolerate being ruled. So that's a very interesting point he makes here. So this is a very thing. It's also evident that those of the same persons, in a manner, in the manner of different people, right? That they're going to be what? Those who deliberate, the military element and the deliberative element and the adjudicative element. But these are the pooling, but this is the force. Now, this means important. The arm is not only, this deals with the question of coercion, right? The ability to use force. This requires, and the problem is that they should be the same people, but there's going to be different ages. Older people have prudence; the younger will have more force. The idea that therefore they're the same people, but different periods of life. He says there, right? But then it is possible. But it is impossible that those who are capable of using compulsion and preventing it from being used against themselves, right? Them will always put up with being ruled. So they better be the rulers, the people who are ruling. Now, this is also an argument against, okay, in book three, now he's saying what should happen. Only those, you cannot be, in other words, the citizens, the people are going to be the citizens in this regime. Those who are participating in ruling. They need to have arms, because if they weren't the arms class, then what? It'd be problematic, because the ones who had arms would not tolerate being ruled. If they were ruled, but not sharing in rule. Okay, so therefore, but another thing about this ruling class is can't be farmers, nor workers or laborers. Why? Because artisans or laborers, people who work, who their skill is their body, right? These are slavish. These don't give you. All of these require you not to be leisurely. There's some odium here, not odium, toil, that doesn't have leisure. So therefore, the life of this city, the citizens must have leisure. And if they don't have leisure, they won't be able to participate in political. So political rulers, the citizens here in this city that we will pray for, the the artisans, the farmers, the artisans, and the workers are excluded from it. Now, in book three, he made a very important warning about this. He said, no, 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 you shouldn't do that. This is something you should not do. that if you exclude the workers and the farm, if you work those people, you're going to exclude the multitude from the city, right? These are the multitude also. That you're going to not have them. You're going to exclude them from sharing and rule. That's very dangerous. This is very unstable. And this idea of the farmers are not doing that, are being like he says earlier, like serfs, like different people. This is the criticism that Plato makes against the Spartans regarding the helots, right? The problem of the helots and the ultimate problem of the instability of the Spartan regime. So okay, so this is interesting that the best regime is kind of residing on an injustice in a sense. This best regime here is kind of residing on an injustice in the sense that, or instability in the sense that it is so. Let's continue what he's saying here. This is a very interesting point about the citizen, this idea of the best regime and what it's composed of in this sense, right? For those who have authority over arms must also have authority over the regime will last or not. So the armed element is the element that the armed element determines the ability of the regime to last or not. So arms, you cannot. Justice needs arms. In other words, that virtue needs arms. Virtue with arms is impotent, and it won't last. See. So therefore, this is the interconnection. It's something that is necessary, right? What remains is for the regime to assign both of these things to the same persons, though not at the same time. Not this. In other words, 43. Reading, and this is a famous thing. Reading empatia with cross ros the text and crowd rather than anthropotois with the manuscript, right? Taking 10 politain as the a subject of epidena. The text of the manuscript is usually translated, what remains is to assign these political rights to both groups of persons. So therefore, this is the different translation of this passage. In other words, what remains is to assign these different rights to these same person. But it is not. But it is natural for power to be found among younger persons and prudence among older persons. And it is advantageous and just to distribute them both. For this division reflects what accords with merit, right? So therefore, what's going to happen is that okay, you need the arms. The arms, the citizens must be the armed element. If they're not the armed element, this regime won't last. So therefore, these it's going to be prudent. But what's going to happen is over time, in other words, um, as they are young, this class of people will be the soldiers, and as they get older, they will be the rulers. Again, this echoes what is said in both Plato's Republic and Plato's Laws, right, to some degree. And given that, wouldn't it be prudent to look at what Aristotle criticizes in that, and therefore would not that be valid? Would Aristotle's criticism of that and those regimes not also be valid here? Okay, I think it would be. So, to what degree is this really the problem of the best regime in this sense? Um, um, Now he says that among other persons, in other words, it is advantageous and thus to distribute them both, for this division reflects according to merit. This idea that they merit it. This idea again, the presupposition again, this idea is regime without a presupposition about who should be happy. So therefore, this is the one with virtue, the people of virtue who's going to be happy. They are the ones who are going to lead the city to happiness. They should be citizens. And the problem is that these people, a life of virtue, must have leisure, and therefore a life of farming, a life of craftsmanship, and a life of a laborer, Banasides, is not suitable for that way of life. It's slavish. It's too odium. It doesn't have leisure, and therefore these groups should be excluded from participating in the regime, i.e., should not be citizens in this regime. And again, this is something that he's warned against in Book 3. That's something that's very dangerous, unstable about that. Possessions possessions too should be assigned in connection with these persons. So 44, this is apparent. Apparent when the word dropped out of the text at this point. The argument goes. Um, that possessions should be assigned, right? That possessions should be assigned to these persons. They should be the owners. For a ready supply, must necessarily be available to citizens, and these are the citizens. So these people, they should own the property. They should own the possessions. For the worker element does not share in the city, nor any other type that or any other type that is not a craftsman of virtue. Now, apparently, this is the illusion of the Republic 500. Again, this is again the echoes. So, not only do we have we have the Spartan regime and the criticism that he's making a reference to Plato. Remember what he said? Remember what Aristotle's criticism of Plato, and therefore, so Book Two and all the criticisms of Book Two seems to be at play here, should be at play here in our understanding of whether we should take what Aristotle says here seriously or not. And I'm going to suggest no, we shouldn't. We should not take this regime as really being the best regime, because red flags should be raising up. I mean, saying, wait a minute, there's a contradiction here. Okay, Aristotle, you contradicted yourself here. Why? Well, again, this is what teachers do. We're saying if you've been paying attention, right? A good teacher is trying to see if you're paying attention to what he said. And he's testing you. This is a test. In many ways, the best regime is a test to see if you've actually been paying attention to the arguments that the lessons that he's taught you earlier. And I think if you're believing it as simply the case, you've fallen and you failed. If you're not saying, but hey, Aristotle, there's something wrong here. Didn't you say that elsewhere? You're a good student. You catch the contradiction, and therefore you should not take this as something that should be just simply imposed. Okay, should be done. This idea of that those only craftsmen of virtue should be allowed to be citizens. The craftsmen of laborers and the artisans, no. It is clear from this, but it's interesting. It is clear from this presupposition, right? So we're supposed to be ruling without presupposition, but this is a presupposition here. Whoa! It is clear from the presupposition. Happiness must necessarily be present together with virtue, right? And that one should call a city happy by looking not at a certain part of it, but rather to all its citizens, right? This is idea. It is also evident that possession must belong to those persons if the farmers must necessarily be slaves or barbarian subjects. Okay, again, 46, this ties to the barbarian or subjects, the aide there, barbarians or subjects, with Durenza, right? This is an understanding of this. Barbarian subjects, right? This is barbarians or subjects, right? This idea here is that the farmers are going to be either slaves or serfs, right? In other words, only the property should be tied to the citizens. So this is a kind of a plantation system that the citizens are going to be the owners of the farms, and the people who are there are the serfs, and are tied to those who are going to be there for. Okay, I gotta do something. Hold on. I'm sorry. Phone interruption. Interrupt us. Um, um, so, in other words, it's happy to all, right? It is also evident that possessions must belong to those persons if the farmers are going to be slaves or barbarian subjects, right? So therefore, this is a question here. This is a very important thing about this nature of the city. They're going to have leisure, and therefore it's going to be, you can't be farmers or even laborers. The farmers must be slaves or barbarians or serfs, like this, right? but that, like helots with the Roman, with the Spartans did with that, or the other populations, right? Um, this becomes what? This becomes a, a, a the citizens are the owners, plantation system, right? The plantation. Of the things enumerated, remains a category of priests, right? So therefore, a member of the priests we talked about, right? So a member of those categories of those six things, we need the divine superintendents. Of the things enumerated, what remains is the category of the priest. So of those six things, right, we did the classes, the soldiers, the armed class, and those who are going to adjudicate and deliberate are going to be the citizens. All the rest are going to be either slaves or subjects or barbarians. And then priests are to be left, right? He says, um, no farmers or workers are to be appointed priests, for it is proper for the gods to be honored by citizens. Since the political element is divided into two parts, these being the armed elements and deliberative elements, and since it's proper that those worn out with age should render worship to the gods and find rest for themselves, it is it is to these that priesthoods are to be assigned. So, who's going to be priests? So, therefore, if young are going to be the soldiers, the more mature are going to be the citizen, the deliberative, those who engage in deliberation, those with prudence are going to be, and more mature are going to be those who are going to be engaged in deliberate with prudence, and those who are older, who have kind of worn out with age, these the elderly are going to be the priests in this regime. Right? This is how this is going to work. So the priest who left, but the priest. So it's again signing with the logic here. So now let's look at this last paragraph of 9. We have spoken of the things without which a city cannot be constituted, and how many parts of the city there are. Right. So if we're getting the parts of the cities, the farmers, the artisans, and the entire labor element, but necessary to be present in cities. The armed element and the deliberate elements are parts of the city, and each of these is separate from the other, some permanently, others by turns. Okay, so these are going to be different things, but they may be connected, and then those who are these things might be divided completely because these are not going to be people who are in this class is must be present, necessarily present of cities, but they're not going to be the same as this, right? But wait a minute, remember this was a must. They can't have that. You're going to alienate them again. This is again what he said in book 3. The danger of that, of that in that sense. This is why that. So I mean, again, this is that problem in book 3. I tried to go look and find a passage, but I couldn't offhand. And right after book 7, I mean, book 3, chapter 7, after he does the regime, 7, 8, chapter 8, 9, 10, around there, to 11, where he gets the peak of the many, right? There is this argument, he says, that it's not safe and it's not a good idea to exclude the many, the multitude of the city, the vast part of the city up from participating. And that the farm, in other words, there's going to be a fewness of this, that only if only those who are virtuous are going to be doing it, and all the rest are either going to be slaves or this. This is a very unstable political system, as Aristotle even says about the Spartan and the Spartans, and also again in about book in book 2, right? So this is how he ends this thing about this discussion of this, that the farthest these are the parts of the city, right? That the farm artisan, entire laboring class, they must be part of the city, right? But not going to be. We're going to exclude them from participating in the regime. He warned against that in book 3. Now this is therefore he's advocating doing something he warned against. Okay, and the armed element, deliberate elements are also part of the city, right? But each of these is separate and from each other, and some permanently, and other by turn. So, in other words, these are never going to be citizens. These are going to be in times of terms, right? With time, the younger, the older, right? And the priests are going to be the eldest, right? So this is how we end this chapter here. This is sort of short. We'll turn to next chapter 10. But if you have any comments or questions or concerns, please put them there below. Questions about this chapter, about this issue, about the parts of the city and the application of it. Um, if you want to any questions or concerns or issues that you want to further knowledge, you want to ask me about this, please put them there and I will respond. If you liked it, like the chapter, please like it. Share it with a friend. Um, Share it in social media. Share it around. Encourage others to. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. Encourage others to subscribe to grow the channel because you can subscribe is that this channel will grow a little bit. If you want to do more for the sake of, well, just pass it around, pass it on things on social media. If you didn't like it, say why. Say, in the comments, say why you didn't like it. Okay, whatever. If you want to follow me on social media, the links are below. If you want to help me continue doing what I do here and to help sponsor this, you can do so by through Subscribe Star or Patreon. Or another way you can help is to go buy my book. Oh, it's a cover upside down. Buy my 2020 Lulu book, a notebook on Aristotle's pot. Now, I've written two other books. I'm writing a third one now. I'm trying to get a third one done. It's been a long time, just 8 to 10 years doing it, but it's slow. About Aristotle's regime science. But this is different. This is not a commentary. It's not interpretation. This is a kind of like a study guide, a guide, notes on the politics, like Cliff Notes, right? Where it goes book by book, chapter by chapter, trying to explain how to read the text, how to understand things, how to navigate it, how to understand chapters, the themes, summaries, outlines, charts, graphs, and other things, and devices to kind of look at the scholarship as well. All these things are designed to kind of be a tool for a student or anyone studying a student of the politics at any level, from the introductory level to the more advanced level. Um, uh, it's available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the online book distributors. But if you really want to help, buy it by Lulu Direct. In other words, if you buy it by Lulu directly, you will. How can I say this? I get the bookstore's profit. Okay, because this way. So please think about doing this. Okay, that's why you can help me out this way. Um, of course, Lulu charges you, and you might say, if you do Barnes and Noble, they might ship it to you for free. So whatever. This is a way you can help. Um, that's it. We covered here. We turn next to chapter 10. Next time we meet. On this, I would like to say goodbye and good day. Have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.